We all good to start? Okay. Plan the United States federal government should substantially increase its prohibitions on anti-competitive business practices by cooperatives exempted under the Capital Volstead Act by at least establishing one member, one vote policies, removing post-production price fixing, and limiting membership to only members who participate in the processing, marketing, or bargaining services. The cooperative advantage one is dairy cooperatives. Consolidation is rising in the milk industry, kills rural communities, and squeezes out small milking operations. Volcker 19, dairy killed my family, adapter, die, resistor, parish, agriculture is now big business. Rise of the CAFO consolidation, shrinking the profit margin led to drastic change in the industry over the years. The number of farming operations dramatically decreased. The number of dairy CAFOs continues to rise rapidly. Livestock production of manure, liquids, liquid itself contains toxic chemicals, pathogens, bacteria, devastating communities, and water contamination to become attached to sediment and groundwater. The failure of farmer cooperatives in this area. The issues are the farmers and the mix of co-ops existing in the game. No connection to farmers being served. Farmers are generally scared with an overabundance. Cooperatives have fallen institutions and become a source of anxiety and difference in efficient use of resources and worse, the potential hostile actor could destroy it possible for farms to escape this niche like organic, but those farms are going bust at the large corporate farms. And the plan shifts cooperations away from overproduction and price fixing, paves the way for smaller, more sustainable dairy farming. Phillips 19. New legislation needs to protect dairy farms, affording protection without clearly defining who qualifies as a producer, allows for the growth and dominance of cooperatives. No entity that does not participate in the processing, marketing, or bargaining service should be permitted to participate in the cooperative. Consolidation must focus on cooperative mergers, acquisitions, facilitate firms and retails, facilitate growth and dominance. Capital Volstead power of the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture to monitor and shut down dairy cooperatives. Capital Volstead Act needs to be reshaped to give the Secretary of Agriculture incentives to police dairy cooperatives. Exempting pre-production practices could provide relief from low milk prices. The dairy farmer should apply across pre-production phases. An antitrust application is crucial. Collusion and corporate shielding collapses effective co-ops. Person 13. Evolution of co-ops has resulted in harmful consequences to current law. Shield collusion among integrated partners that claim to be farmers. The result is commodities are overpriced. Consumers are exploited. Farmers are excluded or exploited by cooperatives. Exercise power over the process. The farmers lack of transparency and accountability. These create the separation of ownership and control. The best option would be to repeal and reenactment. No entity should be vertically integrated, such as not make use of the service of the entity for the majority of its output. And sociological research indicates local control and market shifts rural communities away from CAFOs. ICRT 7. Rural people are concerned about the threat of CAFOs. Each community has several things in common. Opponents of CAFOs. The truth concerning economic impacts of CAFOs is very different from propaganda. The supporters of people simply don't want to live and work in a community that other people don't consider, that people consider to be polluted, regardless of the laws they can only establish when the levels of health and environmental protection in any set of state regulation. Localities be far too complex to enforce. Rural people must be allowed to decide for themselves locally. The USDA has veto power over agricultural legislation. Farmer families widely documented being capable of greater efficiency, not in terms of market power. Once rural people have reclaimed the right to maintain or restore a clean and healthy environment, they can rebuild. An economic analysis agrees local ownership increases activity and competition. Climate 20. Farmer cooperative and local contribution considered a decrease considerably. Patronage is spent as a corporate dividend will highlight the value of local ownership, co-ops, and competitive prices, jobs, and taxes contribute to vitality and sustainability across America. The imperative to consider patronage refunds are returned to members. Wisconsin, Minnesota, Texas, and Nebraska models included localized ownership, showed that economic distribution and highlight the vital role that co-ops serve within Kansas. 1 billion of output was created. This communicates the value of the sector. Advocating for utilization of information communicate the value of the sector. In CAFOs wreck the environment. 2 internal links. First is methane emissions. Myers and Pregnant 15. CAFOs to produce intensive confinement and a wide range of implications for the environment. Methane in the livestock and outpaces gas and petroleum as a source. Methane heat trapping capacity is 34 times that of CO2. Livestock production, fertilizer, feedstock, transportation account for over 1/3 methane emissions. In methane feedback causes dark floor causes positive feedback loops and extinction. Liberton 17. Natural gas leaks into the environment. Methane gas block heat 100 times more effectively than carbon for 10 years. No matter the most. The methane is a major culprit of climate change. If we reduce methane now, it will slow global warming. The climate tipping point and the source of the tipping maybe the oceans are from frozen methane to store frozen methane will slowly thaw. Once release change will happen too fast. Mass extinction will proceed. And second is nitrogen and phosphorus runoff. Finally, 21. When farmland is saturated on the used manure can carry to the surface water and groundwater, causing unacceptable levels of bacteria, nutrients, and synthetic compounds. Manure is a major source of pollution. CAFOs fail to implement manure management processes. Manure is an effective water system, surface runoff, as well as direct discharges, erosion, pollutants. Farm aquatic ecosystem dense out its area of depleted oxygen caused by nitrogen and phosphorus runoff causes the growth of algae blooms, causing the collapse of the food chain, producing toxic microorganisms linked to a massive shift in fish. The Gulf Dead Zone is a result of fertilizer application close to the Mississippi River. Manure contributes to 60% of nitrogen affecting the Gulf, and oceanic dead zones eliminate marine biodiversity, causing extinction. McDonald 18. The ocean is running out of oxygen capacity. According to the most comprehensive studies, dead zones, most marine life suffocated and die. Low oxygen zones have quadrupled zones, and coastal water have increased tenfold. In major extinction events associated with oxygen deficient ocean due to pollution. Nitrogen pollution from agricultural runoff is playing a major role in the ocean. Gets warmer, marine life needs more oxygen to survive. Effects of nutrient loading are greatly increase the number of sites over biodiversity. Plummets. It can hinder reproduction and trigger disease. Low or oxygen triggers the release of nitrous oxide 300 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. Local actions on nutrient-driven oxygen supply and tackling climate change for every aspect of life. And ineffective co-ops cause rural poverty and freeze out small operations. Castro 20. Rural America is being more likely to experience poverty, urban and rural poverty gap, increased growing inequalities, increased consolidation, integrated supply chain, smaller operations become smaller, bigger operations become bigger, vertical integration are prevalent with cooperative consolidation, manifesting a model for agricultural business. Broadly, independent farmers and small dairy cooperatives are frozen out of the market. Together, cooperatives are vertically integrated along the supply chain, not just processing and bottling, but also hauling and inspectors to suppress the farmers. Prices cooperatives set a price artificially low and extract profits, and growing economic inequality drives diversionary nationalism, make wars inevitable. Sold to 11 nationalism obscures inequality and engage in more nationalist spending, increase inequality, domestic inequality is far more important for national sentiment. Nuclear weapons serve the primary defense states foment national pride and send discontent and inequality. This leads to hostility towards minorities. National cause of foreign national pride fulfillment can be found as a result with more militaristic foreign affairs and more interventionist real world politics. Growth and economic inequality should lead to international conflict that risks a revolt against the federal government because nuclear can get free. The next American Revolution be waged by proliferating nuclear weapons. The time in American person resists the United States program destructive power to kill everyone. Prospect arguments for servitors for some of the Moore's law means Murphy's law. Advantage 2 is resilience over consolidation in agriculture. Risk supply chain shocks from disease, weather, agriculture, and infrastructure breakdowns. Regionalization creates resilience. COVID was a warning shot. 21. The U.S. food system is fragile yet essential element of security. COVID highlighted vulnerabilities. Grocery stores right now. Vulnerability lies in consolidation. A system geographically dispersed from a small number of individuals relax resiliency. Regionally dispersed farms carry diverse crops significantly better. Lack of food resulting in the decline of local farmers. Equipment specialized incapable of producing. Supermarket farmers they challenge with labor efforts to source domestic labor. Failed aspects of our food is dependent on cross-country movements, cancellation, and excess stock they couldn't afford to redirect because of the packaging mismatches. Disruption of seas would mean worldwide starvation. Guarding a few number of varieties and full adaptation is lost monoculture. Be prime target for glyphosate manufactured disease. COVID-19 exacerbated food insecurity. Stricter disruption of the system would exacerbate insecurity across the U.S. and civil unrest is likely. Boundless co-option of co-ops threatens the existence of small farmers. The F is key to incentivize and protect them. Havelock 78. Shifts are occurring in ag, the trend towards power without property off farmer enterprises. Farmer cooperatives can provide organization advantage cooperation without compromising in entrepreneurial independence. Capital said the courts have interpreted to give the dominant markets cooperative becoming given for agribusiness. Extension of antitrust exception. Corporations have serious implications for survival of independent farmers. And antitrust solves reversing agricultural consolidation in search for revival of rural communities. Feature 19. Rural communities will soon disappear owned by corporations who appear to remote rural America to derive the challenge of the agriculture system. In the remark, the system resembles carbon the farmers a little power because farmers and rural workers make less money they spend within their communities. Great ripple effect and impact on local business communities. They're hollowed out. Young people are leaving, and folks are struggling. Agriculture makes regular folks make a decent living because politicians that can revive rural communities. Best way to put anti back into antitrust. Their fate is not yet sealed. America can thrive once again if we challenge power. And the plan ensures a regional food system of both small and large farms that ensures a self-reliant backstop without sacrificing the benefits of industrialization. Or field 17, regionalized food system because of locals build self-reliance does not require self-sufficiency. Regional food system produce volume and diversity and variety is attributed to both commodity and local systems and encourages decentralization where appropriate. This focus on capital that has potential in a regional food system that are where product and alternative food networks have should be revised. One constitutes predatory practice and need to re-examine to prevent co-ops from abusing their privileges. Coordinating marketing this overcomes the barrier of the cooperative structure, forces producers to build communities by conflict and rise, giving the producers an equal voice, governance constructions, and facilitating politically engaged reflexive dialogue. One's major barrier to regional food system and the ability of farmers to meet quality demands in mid-scale buyers such as hospitals, schools, and retail chains. Co-op addresses these through education, caution, and regionalization of the food system requires scale up their production in large and mid-scale markets. Regional food production may not always be appropriate. Some level of connecting the global supply chain is still appropriate. Failure, spillover, and collapses agriculture and trade. Again, 19 extreme food system disruption spill over because of networks such as military bases. You require food to function properly, and shortages would have capability disruption that could lead to higher prices, causing a drop in spending. The food system is closely tied at international levels. Serious disruption to heavily traded commodities would grapple throughout the financial system, disrupting national security and functioning of society. Food insecurity escalates hotspots and demolishes ecosystems. Extinction. COVID-19. Recent cases and lessons from history. Regions faces heightened risk of conflict. Food war started as small, quickly escalating the prices of reverberates in the form of prices of refugees involved in major powers and risk transactional war, magnified population, climate change, and depletion of resources, collapse of ecosystem, pollution, widening gap between the rich and the poor, and mega safety. The U.S. is the largest exporter and retreat will have a disproportionate effect. Decline with domino effects worldwide. Supercharging food system will take the wind out of the risk of wars in Central Asia. High corruption of autocratic governments, blame others meddling by Russia and China, unlock cycles of feuding and regime change with political chaos of governments and religious and ethnic tension by the U.S. and Russia. Shortages of food making the Middle East a culture of conflict, set off nuclear arms, resulting in conflict involving WMGs, refugees with a domino consequence. Russia and Italy to nuclear exchange. Africa is microcosm groups fight access to food for important drivers. Africa sits on a knife since outcome of the war. We've got a wide scale food demand and militarization in South Asia, facilitated and sparked refugee movements and scales that dwarf behavior. Oslo predicts that India, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, like post-wars limited nuclear exchange and leases worldwide nuclear winter. A WPF study found that food insecurity increased the likelihood and intensity of conflicts, and antitrust enforcement is key. Alexander 4. Antitrust is more suitable, allowed and official to capture results and regulators. Agencies dominated by lower staff of the private sector. Antitrust is dominated by judges, insulated from pressure of other branches. Legal rules make it less hard to capture, and under this case law, Chevron gives the regulatory agencies difficult and important to intervene, increase the discretion of the regulator.
Are you good?
Yeah.
Okay. First thing I want to talk about is just cut to the chase and get to the meat of the framework debate. Why is negating the 1AC valuable?
Why is negating the 1AC valuable?
Yes. We're in a debate round. You came to debate, so why should it be debated?
Yeah, so we think that like having a discussion about the app is valuable for a lot of potential reasons. First is like the research skills that it might generate, the like incentives that it gives us to do research within debate, to be part of the activity.
Why are those research skills good?
Yeah, so the reason research skills are good is like there's obviously just the generic portable skill stuff that'll be an element of that in the 2AC, but there's also specific impacts on research when learning about consolidation in agriculture and how that impacts small farmers across the United States and different marginalized communities, and why understanding political lawyering in those spheres is good.
Okay, so like, basically we should negate you to make you better lawyers?
What? I think we said a lot more than that. Like, I agree, this is probably about to be a huge framework debate, but I don't know if you want like every 2AC and 1AR argument just like right now.
Well, why is negation valuable for us?
For you?
Yeah, because you're like, we'll become super smart if you make us smarter by forcing us to refine our arguments, but what do we get out of it?
Well, you could get a lot of things out of debate.
Well, and I think you get the things you just mentioned. You also get argumentative refinement, and you get to—
Why? But that presumes that you refine my arguments, right?
No, I don't think reading the AF necessarily means you have to go for any types of arguments. I think that's just a natural competitive incentive of debate. You do research to beat other people's arguments. That's just like a capital T truth, right? Of the activity. I mean, we're in the elims of the NDT. This is a debate. We're here to win. We're here to—
No, it's a debate round. I'm aware. Okay, let's talk about some more like case proper stuff. Why should food be a commodity?
Why should food be a commodity? I don't think the 1AC is like food should definitely be a commodity, but we've made
the 1AC is definitely invested in food as a commodity. Like
we've made arguments about how the food system at an economic level doesn't work right now for various reasons.
Okay, you have read cards that literally talk about reclaiming food cooperatives as a way to merge the corporate form with entrepreneurial individualism.
Cooperatives are price fixing agreements between individuals, which work against like market forces. That is like what a cooperative does.
Okay, did you want to answer my question though, or no?
What is the question, I guess?
Which is that like, you're just like, LOL, we don't do commodification because we said we don't. I reread a line from your card and you're like, LOL, like.
Yeah, it talks about how like those individuals have better access. That doesn't push
like entrepreneurial subjects. Your cards say entrepreneurship is good and you're going for no link right now. Okay, Noah's gonna.
All right, I sent it out. It's one off. Except for I sent the wrong one in C to the email chain, which probably confused everyone. So I'm going to send the right one, and then we're going to have a debate. All right, so everyone's looking good. Has a document. Some thumbs up or some smiles.
What's the order?
It's just one off. Only other disclaimer for this speech is I'm going to play a song. It's kind of slow at the beginning, so if you don't hear it right away, it'll be okay. I'll double check with you all then too. Other than that, thumbs up. Everyone's good. I'm going to go ahead and start in just a few seconds unless I'm verbally interrupted. Debate is a sacrifice zone that habituates the public into exchanging disabled deaths for abled life. The AF's business as usual approach to reform sanitizes the rising tides of eugenics, which secures a system that turns out profit from blood and guts. Megas in 22, we will not trade disabled death for abled life. We will not look away from the mass death that surrounds us from a state machine committed to churning out profit and eugenic abandonment. It is in the interest of power to keep people uncared for. You are not entitled to our deaths in the name of capital. Disabled people are not disposable. We are not your figurative present and your inevitable future. Interdependence acknowledges that our survival is bound up together. If we do not understand that we are interdependent with the planet, we will not survive. Interdependence understands that we are bound together and care for one another. Independence cannot exist in scarcity, competition, comparison, or greed. It flourishes in abundance and collective access. The AF's commitment to generating skills marketable to competitive markets is indebted to a Lockean individual that owns their self and capacities. They naturalize a world where possession of ability is a precursor for economic inclusion to those who cannot skill up and are left to rot from the very market forces they protect. Whelan, Moody, and Donaghy and 22. Policy is based on an unwavering belief that the solution to all ills is more and better skills. The imperative for skills is Tina discourse. Thatcher used the idea to privatize institutions and marketize social provision. Anglophone countries enforced the World Bank and IMF through loans conditional on implementing neoliberal policies in the market state, and the point of all social institutions is to facilitate market competition. Individuals have to invest in human capital to participate. The neoliberal state seeks to create entrepreneurial citizens who invest in markets. The role of the state is consequently to provide the conditions, law, and institutions to ensure those who work comply with market imperatives. The neoliberal individual is premised upon a Lockean conception of individuals as owners of their capacities. Individuals owe nothing to society for their existence capacities. The possessive individual enters the relation of exchange with the owners of commodities, skills, or attributes. Individuals are proprietors of their persons, and society consists of relations of exchange between proprietors, naturalizing the individual as proprietor disguises inequalities that exist in market society and results from it. The impact is eugenics. Capitalist economics require the purging of unproductive bodies to stabilize its regime of extraction. Rosenthal in 21. Modern eugenics demonstrates the ways in which the matrix of institutional confinement, disability, oppression, and elimination of social policy has remained a persistent feature of capitalist society insofar as competitive accumulation of capital has been the guiding imperative of capitalism. Disabled people represent the source of counter probability. They provide disabled people possess this demon undesirable vis-a-vis the productive economy to be able to competitively acquire a paying job within prevailing conditions of capitalist wage and labor. The solution to the problem of disability with past institutionalization, sterilization, and social elimination, which claim the lives of hundreds of thousands of asylums, hospital wards, state facilities, nursing homes, people, college, poorhouse, halfway homes, jails, prison, is in the form of the change over the years of the functions for made warehousing to generate populations with the growth of competitive wage labor, while these minds less probably conformed were excluded. Vote neg to refuse the 180's participation in the sacrifice zone of debate. Imbuing value onto productive labor recreates eugenics by concealing it within a Slavic narrative that treats work as redemptive. Labor won't save you, it will kill you, which is why you should refuse calls for political harmony in favor of queer army of moving parts, disordered noises, and cacophonic demands. Bray in 15. Emphasis on productivity as the site of collectivization resonates with the civic narrative embedded in neoliberalism's understanding of work as redemptive. The focus on common productivity ties our worth to our work. The terms of worth remain within a theological system fortified by a productivist ethic that a man is a worker. If he is not, then he is nothing. The focus on fair wages and just labor practices obscures the problem of value. When we remain within the logic of productivism, work becomes the tool of estrangement. We need quotidian acts of refusal counter to slow death. Counter-exploitative activities are cooperative and radically anti-work. Examples recount the day in which a collective program for being in the world opposed to productive capital, moving from the speculative into the embodied. Refusing productivity will seek more complication than comfort. To refuse to be productive is to refuse to contribute to the wealth empire. Capital must exploit labor, but it cannot without their productivity. We need to challenge capitalist power to put up the sale of the new eugenics that supports ruling power. Disordered sounds will always be cast as action musical because harmony would sound incomprehensible. Listening to cacophony tells us that there was a while beyond, and when we were called to this other place, have to give ourselves to a certain kind of craziness. This crazy, exhausted, unreasonable we is not a we that will come from a harmonious battle hymn, but rather a queer army that is not willing to reproduce the whole in army and unseparable parts without bodies as well as bodies without parts. It is a refusal, not of life, but of lives on offer by neoliberalism. Where impact turning the occurrence of this debate, their call for respectable dialogue over market competition requires structural epistemic gaslighting as it forces disabled people to deny their embodied knowledge of what markets are actually like. Refusal is epistemically generative as it disengages from conscripted conversations like the debate and lets disabled people withdraw their labor from circuits of reactionary dialogue. Polehouse Jr. in 20. I take anti-platforming on refusal to give airtime to particular viewpoints to be resistant to epistemic disengagement, while refusing to engage can itself be harm. Those who are oppressed are often faced with double binds. This is when they are oppressed or castrated, no matter what they do. Characterizing resistant epistemic disengagement, shutting down a conversation can be itself a form of shutting down conversation, refusing to engage in not a disagreement from thinking, but a disengagement for one particular line of thinking. Struggling conditions, I guess, like non-dominantly situated knowers can actually disappear. The epistemic later entailed resisting oppression, less knowers to perpetuating those conditions by casting resistant disengagement, those reasonable endeavors to work to know the world will take place within unraveling knowing fields under conditions of oppression. establishing epistemic institutions and practices that hinder epistemic agency. This unequal distribution of epistemic support and disablement may be enacted unintentionally, so it will intentionally calls for re-engagement might nonetheless be harmful. In these cases, the allies doing work to gain the worst victim to regard the world in a way that is not at odds with their experience. This is that makes the epistemic counseling so pernicious, because when persons have identified themselves as allies, they've signaled that they can be trusted. This is gaslighting, being until one's own self is not epistemologically sustainable. The world processes the person in particular ways, and they need to make sense of the pressures. The role of the judge is to build kite ideas. The AF has to reproduce aircraft carrier ideas, which shoot down abolitionist rhetoric by treating interlocutors as target practice. Calls for political legibility inevitably get folded in, which is why the 1AC must be refused in favor of an abolitionist faith that another world is possible. Zern in 21. Aircraft carrier ideas are warships, mirroring weapons of mass destruction, building of power and money. Kind ideas refuse to play the game they've inherited the present industrial complex, ableist patriarchy, insist on normativity, settler colonialism, and white supremacy. These are aircraft carrier ideas. Abolition is a kind idea, but but the childlike stands before an institution and lapses into daydreams. Institutions not only determine the present, they craft the future. Future is formidable. It seems unstoppable. Any movement towards the abolition must invoke different futures. The struggles live today on certain terrain of desire. This work involves the death of certain desire and the liberation of other. Abolition is double helix of breaking and building effective relations. What is broken is not only the grip of aircraft carrier ideas, our minds and our hearts against the aircraft ideas of a sovereign entity. The abolition of carceral logic is mode of becoming and being within that requires effective world and world wording. Abolition is ever completed is only ever in motion.
I've known more than this in my fingertips. I've known play. I've known more than this in my fingertips. Yeah, yeah. I've known play. And when the doctor calls you in, he's super early, but he's got something to tell you, baby. And when he rolls his card into the room, and you begin to worry, and you run away, collaborating with your sense of doom. Who are you when you're mad? I've been let go. I'm out of control. I've come so far, but I'm still broke. And it's only 7:30. Feels like I'll claw my face off if it's not already stone. Who's to say when I run, when I go, when I run, when I go, when I stop, when I close the door to keep it have my down. Who's to say when I run, when I go, when I go, when I'm through, when I get to you, will I get to you, will I get to you, will I find you? Yeah, man, I guess I'll kill but countless around. I'll get
Okay, are you good for cross-ex?
I'm good.
Okay, cool. So there's a lot of arguments in the 1NC about like why our model of debate is bad. What is valuable, desirable, good, useful about what the negative suggests, other than our stuff's bad?
The 1NC is an impact turn. We don't necessarily even need to win an alternative to win the debate. We have one, it's pretty good.
Well, I mean, something has to be different to solve that offense at least, right? Like,
Well, that assumes that we're reading like the CAPK. Our argument is that uniqueness, both for the alternative and our link arguments, stem from the performance of the 1AC, thus refusal of the 1AC, refusal to participate in the sacrifice zone of debate resolves our link arguments, even if we don't have like a policy option
But
or
I
tactic
guess that
speaking to.
the question that I have then is like, what, the same question that you asked us at the beginning of the 1AC, like, why is that valuable for us? What does that do for us or you or anyone in this round?
You cut out a little bit, honestly, with that question. So if you could repeat, you said something, why for us?
Yeah, like, what does it do for us, for anyone else in this round? Like, the alternative.
Well, we think the F is eugenic, so it rejects your eugenics.
It's also just like the burden on the like us is not the same, right?
Yeah, because you spoke first.
Okay, sure. We'll talk about it. The question of refusal, do you have any opinion about what should be done in the face of like violence, people's inability to gain access to things that like the evidence about capitalism describes?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about when we discuss care in the 1NC, or even what it might mean to be disabled, right? Like we have lots of different things that might attend to violence, right?
What does care look like in debate?
There's not going to be like a solvency debate that you're trying to get into, because we're not going to make a tactics argument about solvency or a movements argument about solvency. It's about refusal and performance and exchange and sacrifice. And the fact that you haven't asked a single question about the link argument yet is pretty bad spot for you, I think.
Sure.
Basically,
my next question is, why are you obligated to negate the AF?
Well, we think it's good to call out your shit and refuse it. So I guess like we didn't have to, but we wanted to. We like playing our song.
Well, you made a bunch of arguments about why that's bad. That was one of the link arguments. Like,
well, yeah, like
engagement,
yeah,
that stuff. Like,
right,
if all of our offense is based off of like the process of debating, why would you just like not do that?
Because our argument is not like just literal, complete, holistic refusal of debating. Obviously, we have to explain what form of violence you did to convince the judges to hold you.
It sounds like the like work is inevitable if like the negatives do that.
This is not our argument. Our critique of rhetoric and rejoinder is more about the rhetorical counterinsurgency you're going to do in the 2AC. It's not like XD, we had to debate you and now we're sad.
Wait, so
like,
there's not
much more nuanced
about anything that's happened yet.
I mean, no, your 1AC was still bad, but you haven't asked about links to the 1AC. You're asking about the alt. So I'm not explaining links to the 1AC.
Is it prep time?
No, I'm sitting in. Go up a little bit. Can't see my head. It's 1, 2, then the off.
Probably just put a case on one page.
Yeah, you can probably just put case on one page. It's just, you know what it is. Like missing Kelsie. We're waiting. I'm gonna go use the bathroom. All right, everyone good? Just in case the off. Cool.
Complete concession of the 1AC gives us solvency to internal links to all of our impacts. CAFOs cause extinction. One is methane and catastrophic emissions trigger feedback loops to cause fast climate change. Second is that ocean acidification and marine biodiversity cascades and causes extinction. Second is inequality. It causes extinction, diversity, international political disenfranchisement, which causes diversity or civil wars that lock in nuclear usage. Second advantage is resilience. Food wars do cause extinction. It detects food supply chain access and it makes land grabs inevitable. To aggregate data indicates a significant chance of violence and nationalist positive feed raising populations off.
We'll pause for a second. I have it at 8:26.
Yeah, can you start over? Because I was kind of distracted by that.
Yeah, I can do that.
But
Carter, could you
not
turn off
muted.
your mic?
So we're gonna. Is anyone with Carter?
I'm texting him right now.
Okay.
Okay,
We're getting there.
I'll just start at the top since it's easier.
Concession of the act means you get full access to our internal link solvency. CAFOs cause extinction. One is methane, causes catastrophic emissions, trigger feedback loops, causes fast climate change. Second is dead zone, causes ocean acidification and marine biodiversity cascades and causes extinction. Second scenario is inequality, causes extinction, drives diversionary nationalism and political disenfranchisement, which causes diversionary and civil wars and locks in nuclear usage. Second advantage is food wars. They do cause extinction. Dex food supply chain to access food makes land grabs and conflict inevitable. Aggregate data indicates significantly higher chance of violence and nationalist policies to feed raising populations off. The plan is the only stable point in clash, key to fairness. They think it leads to the plan, and we should get offense off a hypothetical implementation. Anything else moots a 1AC and skews 2AC offense to explain the game. Impossible clash is the only unique internal to education. The circumvention of agriculture policy discussion is violent. Academia is consolidated, infiltrated mega corporations. The app's recentering of sustainable agriculture via the app is an important policy discussion. And as like 21 land and seed one shaped by BIPOC communities displays the continue to be foundation to exploited labor conditions and the impacts of responsible for CO2 and agrochemicals, followed by emergency use of 93% genetic diversity. Farmers are losing $3 billion per year in the harvest. Yields biofuels can also reduce less intensive regenerative plants to remain profitability. Agribusiness is starting a constant state of overproduction. Agribusiness lobbyists will to preserve subsidy says added on the consequences of depopulation places BIPOC farmers at a significant disadvantage. One particularly affects small mid-sized BIPOC farmers do not have one of the land to purchase. Infiltrated rights is research suggests organic farmers save money, improve self-oil and higher yields. Existing farming policies outside the burden on small and size and organic farms, agribusiness corporations or buyers farmers cannot have a biological companies policy make it infiltrated academia in multi-year contracts of roads integrity of academia actively avoids testing the real world toxicity of their products. Researchers have revealed that scientists have received pressures to identify the varieties or the reasons of technical merit. Food can be weaponized. Consolidation has infiltrates into depressed commodity prices and tripping farmers in policy debates over antitrust or valuable Waller. 20 competition issues as a part of civic discourse separate from legislative proposal. Antitrust has become this important source of politics that engage in the public. One example of this is one of the books for lay other public government NGO studies and competition policy is new works explore antitrust private. It's illegal commandments dealing with the governments and individuals challenge market behavior. One of this is say the domain of technocratic antitrust issues have been debated. Candidates, legislators, pundits, journalists, and voters alike. Even if none of the proposals come to fruition, antitrust debate is a part of a broader engagement with political, economic issues dealing with concentration, globalization, social, racial justice, and response to COVID. And legal engagement is the only way for social movements to sustain countervailing power to challenge the status quo. Ceding the train, the law dooms the egg. Interest in sex 21. Faith in democracy is low. Countervailing power is concerned with mass membership organization as a counterweight to political influences, which, however, the decline in mass membership organization exacerbated political disorientations and movements can face obstacles in translating anger into robust and lasting political power, presenting tax and how to create a sustained power political economy. Civic society is also one of the product of legal structures, although it's been one of the tools of oppression. Legal alternative regimes has encouraged exercise of social movements and impossibility. Indeed, imperative law can build an organization that opposed to armed insurgency. The goal is to encourage the enduring organization can be with the sustained countervailing power to reject the idea that the form of structures, physical development, density, racialized and imminent social change, or regulations is not a degree, and will be difficult to enact the goal of eliminating laws and constitutional protection. The laws, one of the differences is one of the laws says is a choice society cannot make and prefer contingent explanations. Societies and web of shifting relation to the social explanations are tautological, produce the politics of violent interventionism. Latour 5 sociology has been served by this discovery that inequalities hamper actions in explain societies wanted to get to deny the global reactionary however the faith so many agencies are debated just because we share asymmetry so simply repeated power is a result of vital domination. It can be produced reject up an impossible solution. The society has inertia and state to bring down domination down bodies hierarchies so one of the social some no logical continuity is a complete contradiction. Action by others agencies does not mean that societies take it over inequalities prove the other actors or in play more the social negatives of the Lincoln anti-association sociology uses that adjective no exponential or temporary interactions become durable. It jumps from interactions and social forces enforcing interactions and non-human societies that generate social order within common interactions and distinguish the durability substances force that is not present as group if source material connections are always way too weak. It's difficult to durability and entrenched relations if the social orders made of social interactions. We are unstable in every aspect. Analysis one to believing the interaction of social forces and explanation they argue durability are provided by inertia of societies. It's ontological, it's foolish, it's dangerously misleading. There's no empirical way to decide how stuff is in no place. The ideas become like a containership with no inspectors permitting the board of cargoes empty or full connections or deadly has become anyone's guess, much like WMDs in Iraq. And evaluate extinction first. You have a cognitive basis, a bias against the probability of global food collapses. International good bear at all 17 existential catastrophe just where the future could be extremely long, flourishing. Given time, probability of prevention is a huge value. Catastrophe is given to generations. Nothing. The risk reduction goal of good benefits. So where the dispersed area, the more the global benefits are enjoyed. In common interest benefits are enjoyed by generations. No say the political process problems of cognitive temporal free rent confidence is underestimated. There's not a risk catastrophe, risk or salient. This is heuristic availability shortcut, something that can be called to another basis. It's still the tools of vulnerable study decides the benefits that affect on response. People give numbers when safety and line some get too large decision maker front of treats where it's the risk of some of the problems less severe to wider range of evolution. Where it says a cap is good. One is it adapts to this sustainable Hansen 21 beyond capitalism is a normal task. Even the word is a prominent capitalist it is a century and survives issues of adaptive revolution. But a plan would take climate far more difficult, less hospital deterioration. Even investments in climate mitigation are substantial, generating jobs and new tech and save millions. Modeling disputes to claim 1% GDP every year can be absolutely color proponents. So the extreme project projects it for disputes IPCC 2% by 2070. And 2 is regulated capitalism solves war, environment, quality of life, and alternatives increase segregation and poverty, preserve empirical measurable indicators for policy. 21 capitalism is the best solution. Adjust the well-being cap is implemented, not return against what it's sake is the poorest of billion of people remain in poverty and depression. Record increasing well-being and justice and increasing activity of public good wealth is a larger effects for public good medical knowledge. It's a driver of life expectancy, morality, and even minimize the disease, lower poverty and higher rates of racist, sexist, homophobic opinions. Right cap has less cap poverty is worse than overpopulation and food insecurity population. Immeasurable indicators capitalism promotes freedom and tolerance. Cap is a necessary precondition of an improvement society to be able to invest in anti-capitalist system would produce the resources needed for disaster of the poorest billion and get to the reformism debate. Frame the link the debate through link uniqueness. The loss inevitable and antitrust is quote. Then there are other debates happening at the NDT. The alt doesn't change the source of violence. It's only a risk that the app is an effective restraint. We do the link debate here. Force is a sacrifice link. It's not a unique reading of the app thumps and so do other routes. There's no reason why it's unique to this debate. Second is market skills is a link. The market skills link. It's also non-unique. The reason why the affirmative would increase or worsen the acts of capitalism, the discussion of a piece of in the evidence. Third is a labor link. So non-unique every debate links. Framework debate answers that. For all the framework debate above answers that. These are contextualized to framework, not the app. We are impact earning reformism, activism, debating and learning about constructing arguments is effective in the face of violence comparative to their strategy, and specifically true for disability. Vargas 17 Phoebe Smith cannot walk and move her body, but move most of her body, but it's not stopped her from thousands of others with discipline making fears about Trump. Her they found in the way to be visible when on her launch a website of disability march. Many expressive fears about healthcare instability over the headed the disability calculus. Women march said 45,000 people disabilities attended the event. Starting point for social movements and integrating accessibility disability rights. And do the perm debate here. Perm to the out all other instances. A single expansion of the single reading of the 1AC isn't enough to derail anti-capitalism. Isn't enough to derail under their solvency arguments or precious every precious expansion of some bumpers. And perm do both solves mutual exclusivity or arbitrary Linsky. 15 for disabled people the stark pressures of demand response action in complex ways and they do not seem to be the prominent resistance yet. It remains an important engagement that without adherence to practice never suffer antagonisms, although practices and theoretical shapings to drive themselves wittingly and unwittingly in any mutually exclusive alternative results in more violence.
Yeah, actually skip that card. We'll go to the alt debate.
We just need to pick
First is vague, it's bad. It's a moving target. Excuse the app and makes a reclarification. Always solves their offense. Re-excusing class and decision making. Reject the argument. The remedy damage. Implicate solvency and is a reason why you should kick the all. Incorporatization of activism causes corporate scholarships and activates commercialized advocacy. 17 participant delivery practices transform participants in millions of capital who have promised some ways and countermeasures on neoliberal governance, while other parts such as synthetic field experience are authentic and overpowering. Such feelings are channeled to serve one of the goals of responding institutions want to transform individuals, neoliberal subject corporations. Mobilize support for favorite policies when Obama announced one of the gainful employment acting of university millions contracting with consulting firms and mobilize students. Mass participation can be used as a means of legitimate elites agenda lobbying and combined with the proponents of partnership with the social movement in the public consultants and commercialized citizen advocacy is one of political marketplaces, and what made it appear as authentic as grassroots is crafted public professionality, the corporatization activism, more corporations finding financing partners, but also the activists are spearing the goals corporates framework. Radical activism is defined by a role with a structural change fading fast. Capitalist revolutionaries have wanted to penetrate the consciousness of individuals.
Mark that at individuals.
Okay, we're gonna take prep real quick. Okay, we're good.
He's 28.
932 is what Liz is trying to say to me, I think. Okay. Which are you ready?
Yep.
So what do you do for Black and brown farmers? Do you give them skills? Is that what this first card you're reading is trying to say?
The first piece of evidence reading is a discussion about how they're locked out of markets because of consolidation. We think the F is a good idea because it restores power to small farming and allowing them to have market share.
So market share is what gives people agency?
No, it's that they're
not the
forced out of
argument.
agriculture.
No, but if they had more, that'd be better.
Well, if they
Well, if
were,
they have more market power, they wouldn't be living on
They weren't,
land that
like,
they don't
faced into,
own
like,
and not
poverty.
making any
Okay,
money.
I think
mean, poverty is bad. I don't think that's like
poverty is
a hot take. Whoa.
okay. Last card you read, actually, it begins with participatory deliberative practices transform participants into the minions of capital. What are you all? Are you all minions of capital? You're sounding like you're really engaging in some.
This is a
deliberative
question.
practices.
This is a that piece of evidence.
Which part?
It's the
That's the first line of the last card that you read. I think it is more descriptive of the affirmative than it is anything that would ever happen to you.
That's fine. It is because we have read that capitalism is good. 1, 2. We are making an argument that trying to divorce.
Wait. If cap's good, it's good to be minions of capitalism.
What? This is two arguments. One, this argument is about activism in the face of capitalism gets corporatized, i.e. movements against capital are ineffective, get corporatized and become minions of capitalism. We are impact turning that notion in the specific instance of the F that we think capitalism is good. The critique has said that capitalism is bad, does a bunch of bad stuff. We don't really know what the alt does post 1 and C. This piece of evidence makes the argument that if the alt does defend movements against capitalism, that they would be co-opted.
Okay. What do you get if you win contingency? Actually, a better way to ask that question is how does the affirmative understand disability?
What do you mean? How does the affirmative understand disability?
Well, you
That's
said the world
very
is
vague.
contingent, which I assume is your answer
Yeah,
to.
our argument is that
no. Before we answer that question, we need a better explanation of what you mean. Like,
Okay,
how does
do you
the
think
app
disability is the ground
understand-
state of life?
Is the ground state of life? I also
Yes.
don't know what that means.
That's what our Zavastanos card says. It says that all people are engaged in.
Okay.
Uh,
Also, Noah, you're being too nice right now.
Okay.
What is your conception of disability and disabled people?
What does that mean?
Shut the fuck up. You know what I mean. You know what I mean. Have a schema of value that analyzes what disablement and disability is and who is and is not disabled. Is that, or even if that's something, because I don't even know what the fuck you're talking about when you're saying this is good for disabled people or whatever, because we've criticized categories of humanism, personhood, etc. So it's like
the contingency arguments that you're asking about on the framework page are more arguments about the possibility that governments can be reflexive, that movements can be good and successful when they are coupled with things that are pragmatic, such the AF.
Or reflexive
Right.
for who? Pragmatic for who is this question, you know?
For all people involved.
All people.
That's the argument. It's like we think that the AF is a good idea. We obviously don't think like people with disabilities are bad or anything. Like,
Oh, I sent it. Okay, with an overview. Okay, can I get thumbs up? I see 2 thumbs up. Amber's good. Corey's good. Sydney's good. Wichita? All right. Anyone, if something changes, let me know in like 5 seconds. Verbally interrupt me, otherwise I'm about to start. Debate is a sacrifice zone that compels participants to rationalize eugenics, equipping debaters with the skills to defend the exchange of able life for disabled death. Wichita's appeal to contingent quick fix solutions to antitrust policy glosses over capitalism's fundamental reliance on eugenics to enforce mass complacency with the wage. Those who fail to meet production standards of the so-called average workers are left to rot outside the wage from homelessness, pushed into the formal economy of sex work and drugs, locked up in prisons or institutions and asylums, which they drop theory of power argument in the 2AC. If we win this fundamental thesis claim, you cannot vote affirmative because the world they ask you to protect is not worth saving. You must refuse the process of exchange inherent to their model of debate. Even if you believe they solve 100% risk of extinction today, it does not mean everyone gets to live tomorrow, because the good life is not universal, which is why Wichita feels comfortable expanding mom and pop small farms, even as their own evidence admits that the industry will continue to rely on exploiting undocumented labor, i.e. 1AC Luke says that, quote, efforts to source domestic American labor largely failed, as over half of American farm workers lack legal status. It proves how the F profits from systemic debilitation as people pushed out of the category of the worker citizen are forced to harvest food but cannot receive the protections of co-ops because they're paid under the table, not registered employees, etc. By the 2AR, they will not have any way for you to redress these forms of violence. Simply sweep it under the rug with arguments like case outweighs / cap good or crackdown, which is the precise rhetorical exchange that makes debate a sacrifice zone. Instead, you should use your ballot to affirm embodied interdependency. In terms of this debate, that means when a disabled person is here in front of you at the conclusion of her 8-year debate career, telling you that the only fucking way you can care for disabled people in a world of eugenics is to overcorrect and prioritize them when conducting impact calculus, you should listen, because we are not meant to live another day in the fucking first place. Millions sterilized, perish from mercy killings, premature deaths from unconsensual testing, and more. I'm tired, you're tired, and the planet is dying. Line by line. They say framework and group it. 1, the role of the judge is to build kite ideas. Ours are in evidence. Contrast these with aircraft ID carrier ideas, which operate as weapons of mass destruction that shoot down critical thought. Ableism, patriarchy, heteronormativity, settler colonialism, and white supremacy are aircraft carrier ideas premised on a desire to stabilize the accumulation of wealth and power through rhetorically outflanking dissent. Kite ideas do not propose challenging tanks with missiles, but daydreams, a childlike demand to carve out a future that seems impossible. The struggle today is lived on the train of desire, which involves the death of certain libidinal economies and the liberation of other ones, which involves a double helix of breaking and building relational ties, of steering aircraft carrier ideas off course into those flying fights, which is why it is not persuasive for Wichita to say, well, you debated us, therefore you link to all of your critiques of clash and rejoinder. Our argument is another world is possible, but foreclosed by the AF's desire to temper our political imaginaries, which means you should refuse to validate their participation in the sacrifice zone. Second, unfairness is good. You should move the AF to deter participation in debate sacrifice zone. Our impacts drastically outweigh their vacuous appeals to competitive equity because we've impact turn the reasons by playing their game is good, i.e. their skills and education are bad. That's our link argument. 3, you should deplatform the AF. Speech acts are not just conduits for expression, but acts that coerce, demand, and persuade audiences towards certain political investments. If we win the AF as part of an intellectual legacy that sets the boundaries on leftist discourse around eugenic economics, then you should end the reiteration of genocidal ideologies, even if you're hesitant, because this is a fight we must win at all costs. 121. Speech is used to form or express ideas about reality. Speech acts attempts certain actions, demanding, promising, ordering, and threatening, persuading with other content is true or false, less relevant than contemporary debate. Incredibly true speech is simply a tool for sharing opinions and defeat bad ideas by exposure, argument, persuasion. When groups gather and speaking public sphere, they're not offering their ideas to the marketplace of ideas, both offensive and fanciful to pretend they're in some sort of homogeneous ideal speech situation. As long as we're under racial capitalism, some people's speech will always be freer than others. The left should not avoid the work of collectively recognizing, naming our enemies, and seeking the end reiteration of genocidal ideologies. We deplatform not because we are attempting to develop a perfect set of rules. We deplatform because this is the fight we need to win. They say that the disavowal of the 1AC is violent. There's a
neoliberalism gets at the claim that it is violent to suppress the 1AC's analytical knowledge, even though it is explicitly sacrificial, is precisely how liberalism latches onto the language of liberation movements to sort of consolidate its own death march. You should question what they mean when they say that they help Black farmers, but require the exploitation of undocumented immigrants to sort of cohere the possibility of agricultural industries. They say debates over antitrust good. The Tweezy has conceded our thesis of eugenics, which makes it impossible for them to win this debate. I'm going to explain the target practices out here. We are impact turning the burden of rejoinder insofar as Wichita uses disabled speakers as target practice to refine their defense of eugenics. Think of 1AC cross-ex. Debating them is good so they can become more skilled lawyers. Well, we should feel honored to learn about agriculture for them. We refuse the good faith invitation to debate because it requires we labor within the sacrifice zone, exposing the after critique so they can vaccinate dissent and learn how to defend competitive markets against every angle of critique. So becoming better lawyers means learning how to shut down dissent from disabled folks by reframing the conversation, which is the precise move that they are asking us to make. 1NC cross-ex when they're like, what movements do you do? We want to just say that it'll get corporatized and cracked down and fucked on. Our refusal to provide the terms of dialogue, the solutions that they can shoot down with aircraft carrier ideas is the performance of solvency, which means that when the 2AC is like, yes, GMU might be right that we caused eugenics, but case outweighs, this is how they sort of rationalize the process of exchange. If you let them sacrifice disabled people when the stakes are low, i.e. in a debate round, you should assume they will get sacrificed when the stakes are higher outside. Couple of impacts. First is counterinsurgency. Wichita co-ops the rhetoric of revolutionaries to brandish neoliberalism. Think of 1AC Havelek, which says that, quote, farmer-owned co-ops provide the organizational advantages of the corporate form without compromising entrepreneurial independence. They aren't a radical critique of big ag, but a PR campaign designed to restore public faith in capitalism. That's why 1AC Cartensen goes on to say that since, quote, commodities are overpriced, quote, consumers are exploited, which presumes the ask can generate a non-exploitative relationship to consumption. Our argument is that all commodities are price fixed because their use value is substituted for exchange value in competitive markets. Even if the ask makes food cheaper, more sustainable, and accessible, they retain its commodified form, which means only people who could exchange their labor for wages get to eat. They secure a world of eugenics and slow death for disabled people by convincing them to invest in a system that will work them to death. Specifically true in the context of their ECRD evidence, which says that, quote, family farms are preferable to CAFOs because they're capable of greater efficiency and productivity. The world they create is centered around the unquestioned value of accumulation and production, which sacrifices disabled people since they're deemed to occupy a side of counter profitability for their inability to labor. That's Rosenthal. Two is gaslighting. Wichita's rely on an ableist model of debate that wields an army of statistics and performance metrics like card quantity, line-by-line efficiency, and other tactics of normalcy to manufacture consent with dispossession. Specifically, their call for good faith debate over antitrust policy is reliant on what Pohlhaus Jr. calls structural epistemic gaslighting, wherein marginalized speakers are forced to believe truths that contradict their lived experience because truth is seen as a matter of technical communication, not embodied relations to the world. This causes psychic violence for disabled debaters who internalize the violence of the world as their own fault because we are told by people like Wichita that we are wrong/bad because we didn't read enough cards with good enough empirics to convince people who are supposedly allies that they should care more about ending eugenics than preserving profit. Pohlhaus says that modes of communication that negate itself are not sustainable, so you should not burden us with answering arguments like cap good unless they prove cap is good for disabled people, because you should not force us to play parity with eugenics. Refuse sacrifice at all costs. 3 is Turn's case. We are impact turning every reason why you would vote AF. They use their education and skills to amplify reactionary desires while policing the legibility of disabled politics. This reproduces a masculinist and ableist public sphere where truth is determined by oral capacity to speak efficiently and fluidly, to present solutions and evidence that assuages the concerns of eugenic policymakers. That means even if Noah and I could prove them wrong in this debate by outperforming them, our impact turn is to the implicit demand for resiliency they force disabled people to occupy in order to be taken seriously. You should conceptualize this through AF's Philip, i.e. Wichita's model gets exported to the real world to gaslight disabled people by outflanking them in conversations. Since debate gave them the skills to think quickly on their feet, they can convince those who weren't graced with 8 years in this activity that they're wrong because of their inability to perform according to ableist metrics of communication and truth. I know that was a huge ass link overview, but I'll answer the law key argument here. AF does not solve this. They use fiat, so they don't have any fucking legal skills in the first place. But even if they somehow win that they do, we have impact turn the way in which they spill up. Contingent explanation's good argument is so irrelevant in this debate because they cannot win contingency good if they have conceded our structural theory of power. Our Rosenthal evidence says that capitalism needs eugenics to reinforce complacency with the wage because those who cannot produce must be exterminated to remind workers what happens if they step out of line and refuse, which is an argument they have no fucking game on. Extinction first should fucking disgust you. Can you hear me? This is exactly what we mean about the sacrifice zone. Debate equips people to develop various rationales that ultimately just rationalize eugenics for different reasons. The Tracy Barrett card they read here accuses us of, quote, temporal free riding, which is like how disabled people get called selfish when they raise critiques of inaccessible spaces, request accommodations, etc., because we're always burdening the collective. So when we say the AF reproduces eugenics, they're like, stop being temporal free riders. You're actually going to cause extinction and prevent future generations from existing, which is how we are always deemed the problem, which is how scapegoating, capitalism relies on scapegoating to conceal its own dispossessive violence and reproduce itself. Now, group the two shitty cap good cards they read. I'll explain how refusal works here because I think it makes our argument very clear. I'm not going to take them on the ticky-tacky yes-no questions of this debate because our refusal to provide the details of the debate about why capitalism is bad is how we avoid the rhetorical outflanking. Refuse to do the form of labor that enables them to refine their arguments to become better advocates of eugenicism. This is our deflection dissent. The 2AC shift to an abstract defense of capitalism that is simultaneously not attendant to disabled people is a way for them to rhetorically deflect from our particularized discussion of eugenics. They have no argument indicating that the system of private property is good for disabled people, and every example of progress that's occurred was only because disabled people fought tooth and nail for rights by occupying federal buildings, staging die-ins in Congress, and interrupting conventions. Even if you think capitalism solves war, climate change, etc., if we win is structurally premised on eugenics, you have an obligation to refuse it because touting its merits only deflects from the political antagonism of eugenics.
Good. I didn't see. Was there a thumbs up?
Oh, sorry. I honestly had my audio off.
Oh, okay. You good?
I'm good now.
Okay. So under your interpretation of framework and how this debate should play out, what happens when debaters who have disabilities engage with this argument? What does that look like? What does that mean?
It's not this identity politics move is not going to do anything for you because we have made linked arguments about the politic and scholarship and performance of y'all in this debate leading to systemic disablement and rational.
Sure, that may be true, but that doesn't really answer the question. What happens when people who have disabilities make those arguments in debate?
Then they should not make those arguments in debate. Like disabled people can be wrong. Disabled people can reproduce eugenics even. Like this is the classic critique of identity politics, which is that no person within an identity category is immune from reproducing the structural conditions that of violence that
I don't know. To me, that on face sounds wrong because it sounds like blaming disabled debaters for reading plans.
I think this more relates to the target practice. No, I think this more relates to like the target practice dissent. Because like the way you explained it was very much like personalized, not in response to specific political ideologies.
What? Like because I mentioned cross-sex? Because I mentioned
like how you describe how target practice works.
Yeah.
It's not about political ideologies, it's about people.
Yes, yet, well, the two are co-constitutive, I guess, because like embodiment, right? That's what our Poll House evidence is saying, which is that knowing does not occur on equal terrains because the world presses people in particular manners and people have to make sense of the way in which they are pressed by the world. That is our argument about how truth is not sort of like produced in deliberative spheres, but rather is articulated through embodied experiences, right? So our argument is sort of a critique of the contingent marketplace of ideas that undergirds your assumption of debate. But also like we just have like links to the 1AC. Like I highlighted like 8 cards. So like you got to answer that shit too, or otherwise you're pretty fucked. So
well, it makes sense.
That sort of is what the filter for all of our like uniqueness arguments about why you should be refused is because you've done so many particular investments in debilitative violence. It's like I don't really care if you could like if we closed our eyes and imagine fiat and then we like pass a plan, maybe we could do some shit. But it's like I really don't know
why do you think that our F is solely tied to fiat? At what point in this debate have we tied the F to only being something?
If you want to drop the fiat shit, like bet. That's, but I doubt you're going to do that by the 2AR. The 2AR is going to say, we have a plan text, we did the case outweighs, we have an extinction impact, and you do not. And if that's not the case, then, maybe my 2NR will wrongly predict the 2AR, but I just don't think that's going to be true.
Sure, that's fine. Why is, for instance, reading a multitude of pieces of evidence bad in this specific instance?
You think our link argument is you read cards?
No, I don't think that's a link argument.
Okay, well then I'm not really sure.
I think you've made an impact about why tech, like equating tech and truth. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
There's no doc, but I'll start on the permutation. Just gonna do. All right, so we're all good. Hey, Derek. I actually don't see Amber. There we go. And Michelle, you're good too? Cool. I'm gonna go ahead and start in just a few seconds unless I'm verbally interrupted. You can group the permutations, refuse to turn noise into music. The perms represent an all branch that we have refused their desire for political harmony because they fear what they disavow. Disability is everyone's collective future, or whether by injury, violence, or time, which means that the future is disabled, even as disabled people are imagined outside of the future. But when confronted with the fact they can only assimilate and translate our words into demands legible to eugenicists, that's why refusal is a performative rehearsal and opaque rebellion that refuses to be folded into neoliberal circuits of communication. The only risk of co-option in this debate is from the affirmative team, but even if they tried, they'd fail because they do not know what we do or want. That's why the song says, I've known more than this and with my fingertips. It's an argument about how embodied knowledge both precedes and exceeds expertise that debate equips you with based on who and what you've touched, who you felt your feelings for. The desire for political legibility is inherent to the act of making a permutation because it seeks to register our politics within the frame of cost-benefit analysis, which already assumes a conditional relationship to abolition wherein it can be divested from or compromised within the phase of crisis, i.e. waiting to do refusal until we solve climate change as if it wasn't the oldest trick in the book to sacrifice disabled people. There's a professionalization to add to the perm. The only explanation will be to situate disabled people into the matrix of profit that requires they foreclose embodied independence. The collectives or cooperatives that they create are not sites of mutual aid. They are conglomerates of farmer that are only shared motive is profit, which means disabled people have to be recognized under their terms of production. The only thing that they do is allow people engaging in care to dominate markets, which is a quote from their Halvik evidence. It's more of a self-report about them and how they see disabled people's goals. Post staff, the state is now free from any obligation of providing care if they describe the permutation this way, because if they ever get around to it, because the self-sufficient, resilient cooperatives will sustain one another. But remember, the only thing that they're going to be sustaining is this vibrant relationship to subjectivity that the market fosters. I'm gonna say that mutual exclusivity is generated by performance. So there are questions about what or theory and practice about the card that they read aren't separate. It's not a net benefit to the permutation. Even if they win this argument, it's also not a justification for combining our advocacies because it is an impact turn to the performance of the 1AC. I'm going to answer a few of the link uniqueness arguments here. First of all, question mark, link uniqueness is generated from the debate itself. We think the debate starts from the performance of the 1AC, which means only we confront the stakes of rhetoric. More specifically, the sacrifice link argument and the 2AC is strange because they say we haven't linked to you yet in cross-X in the 1 and C, and the first words out of the 2ACU's mouth are threats to us that disabled people will die if we don't capitulate to affirmative. This is also true of the market skills link because the occurrence of the 2AC says that the market is the only thing worth protecting, i.e. when they say that capitalism is good and tell us we should all probably just become fucking minions. The alternative debate, vote neg to refuse the 1AC's participation in the sacrifice zone of debate. We are cutting to the chase about the relationship between their rhetorical performance and the ballot. If we have won that they participate in the sacrifice zone, you should not vote for them no matter how nuanced they sound. At the end of the day, they are trying to convince you to exchange disabled deaths for able life with anti-competitive rhetorical strategies. This is why they will position us as the problem throughout their speeches as if we were causing extinction, rolling back the ACA and ADA or hurting workers. When disabled people speak, communicate, and debate, they are scripted as unproductive and threats to collective survival for saying wrong words, proposing the wrong ideas, or etc. This is because the process of objecting and scapegoating disabled people conveniently conceals the actual power relations at play and outsourcing feelings of dispossession onto marginalized subjects rather than those doing the marginalization. What's so insidious about the affirmative is they try to position themselves away from this. Specifically, things like the Vargas evidence are impact turned by the alternative because it is the will to resiliency. The Wall Street Journal op-ed on the disabled woman who they found is marching is something that suddenly the affirmative can take credit for, even though this, its most charitable interpretation, is a version of the alternative being activated. It's certainly not something the affirmative can take credit for because the plan being enacted does not make disabled activism more likely, and if it does, it's only true because of our theory of power. This is not a big alternative, so they're certainly not cheesing on us on this. We're clear about what type of ideas are included in aircraft carrier mantra. Things like capitalism, settler colonialism, white supremacy need to be shot down so they can't get a link argument because it's not that we will reveal some sort of tactic in the 2&R to win the debate, and if they think it is, that's mythology, but it's about what we are doing here. At worst, it's to reject the argument, not the team, which is fine because our links are too too fucking good anyway. A 5-0 is good for all solvency. You should do everything in your power to invert the schema of debate to signal your willingness to upset debate sacrifice. So the notion that value stems from labor capacity, i.e. that you should only vote for the alt if we have the ability to produce solutions that you can cognitively map onto all your concerns, reproduces neoliberalism's understanding of work as redemptive. There's a framing issue. Do not buy the ass appeal to the sensibility as a member of the debate community. The best 2AR will sound something like just forgive our investment in eugenics and debate us normally, prove us wrong, and give us practical solutions that maybe will listen, which is our whole argument about how productive capacity informs who we consider to be valuable, speaking of listening to, who can generate truth, and who can persuade that you need more help to survive. Only if we are able and capable of meeting the decorum and research requirements of hegemonic debate norms can we register our cares the same as theirs. But even if we could debate them and beat them, what about others who cannot, in and outside of debate? The AF should not be able to consistently rationalize eugenics just because they can think on their feet super fast because debate made them smart. That is our impact turned to their skills and education. Our Bray evidence says that revolution will not come from harmonizing with neoliberal markets, but from a queer army of moving parts that screeches and cacophony. Last argument is this minions this activism card is full send pathology of disabled activism. Their argument is that shooting down aircraft carrier ideas in favor of kite-like abolitionists somehow the product of quote public affair professionals, which suggests that Wichita and the subjects that they create see critique from disabled people as a CIA psyop that hampers milk production. It doesn't make any sense, but it is in fact their framework argument because it means that the subjects are always skeptical of our scholarship, which is their gut reaction in debate is to say actually being a minion of capitalism is good because that's the way we can make sure the market lives on, even if it costs some, our lives. Yeah.
We have 10 minutes.
We got 10. We're starting. We stopped at 550. Sending the doc.
Okay, I'm just gonna do it on the K. I don't know what the purpose of going to the K page is. For the flow. Did everyone get the doc? Okay, still don't have it.
Hold on, we're gonna use one sec. We use 6 seconds.
Okay, we all good? Cool. I'm not going to do the case page proper, but our interpretation on framework is that we should get to weigh the app against the alternative. They need to prove mutual exclusivity. The first net benefit is clash. They might get more negative ground, but what does that mean? Does that mean that it's good ground? Or are they right that our representations or investments or neoliberalism are bad, that we should be held accountable and that we should be held accountable for our justifications? Anything else means that we need 100% link mitigation, which limits out any of our discussions and proves all of our offense. It's also the only education that's unique to debate because of testing, etc., which I'll answer later when on their impact turn. Second is fairness. It makes the app impossible to say fairness has no impact and render a decision. It discourages participation, which link turns any of their changes about debate being revolutionary or having any sort of value. Debaters will never read the most theoretically sound or legitimate forms of their arguments because fairness always overcomes pedagogy, which will also shape how we maximize all of our arguments to prove wins. The repeated calls for the ballot, etc., prove those things. The right, if they are right that they are being forced to negate the act, that being forced to negate the act is violent, they simply should have chosen not to, and there's no reason to call for the ballot. The framework stuff proper that they have at the very top, the link arguments at the very long part of framework, you should have a high threshold for me answering all of these things because they're basically spread out through like a 9-minute framework 2NC. So have a low threshold for direct comparison. The industry link stuff that they have at the top first. How does the alternative solve this? What does it do about it? Why are those things something that the app is inherently invested in? i.e. use of migrant labor. All of those things exist in the status quo. They are harmful practices in agriculture. We have read evidence that says that engaging in the discussions of those policies helps us better understand how to resolve those things, etc., which solves all of our offense. There's also not like a direct answer to the co-option stuff about their rhetorical moves. There's no link. Our ethics comes with the plan. It's the only way to resolve discursive co-option. Anderson 6. Political effects depend on certainly on interest-rated movements that are not automatically achieved. There's no guarantee that denaturalization of repression of radical transformation rather than contempt in absolute terms. We should foster public debate in the deliberative process of mass argument, political importance and community ethics, clarify the condition and possibility of accumulation of specific practice and self-reflexive questioning, open up towards difference and reciprocal recognition, the respect and the attainment of enabling intersubjective practices and communication, not a hegemonic normalization, promoting communicative activity and rational argument does not translate into procedures to restrict the political imaginary subject's relation to cultural communities that she might be embedded to. Also the argument about aircraft carriers, etc., all begs the question of what these daydreams in debate function to do. What do they do about any of our own subjectivities? What does rejecting the act do? What the fuck does voting neg do? They're like, reject them. Why? What the fuck does the ballot do? There's zero explanation of any of these things, which means that when they're just going for refusal, or if they need to have a clarification and explanation of what the ballot does, otherwise there's no offense. They say unfairness good. This argument does not answer the stuff that I explained above. They just said skills. I explained why fairness is an external impact. The deplatforming stuff, the deplatforming the app stuff doesn't solve. What the fuck does that do? Why does deplatforming us to solve anything. It absolutely does not. All of the normative practices of debate that they have described are not just about capitalism, not just about the functions of the 1AC, which begs the question of how do you resolve those things? The deplatforming stuff does not, because debates will continue. The negative still engages in theoretical practices like line by line, etc., which are all things that they have impact turned instead are inaccessible in debate. What the fuck do they do to solve them? The rhetorical move of the alternative, though, is dangerous and makes all of our co-option arguments stronger. Moana, 29 power holders of pro-binded movements, ideas weaken the movement and active buying off moderates of the subgroups. Consider the FLA with a watchdog organization in response to special labor. The FLA funding comes as part of the compassionate capability to monitor power holder in the collusion of reformist activities to undercut the movements, and another method involves appropriating movements' identity to dilute the effectiveness, rallying tool to adopt a rhetoric of the environment movement towards appropriating sustainability, green or organic, confused with the public. The impact can be detrimental. Co-option creates an internal struggle within the movement, which adds to fragmentation and repression, which creates deterrence in new movements. This offense is also magnified by the solution of them having a problem of to solve the problems of strategies of people in debate who are disabled that want to engage in things. They're like, we're like, we want to engage in these things. They're like, get the fuck out, go fuck yourself. That is not solve any of their offense. It link turns their target practice stuff. The way that it was explained, the arguments about refining your standards, your capabilities to kick disabled people out of debate, they don't solve any of those things. It's also not violent to say that people's arguments are wrong. That is our entire argument, but they do link to a massive paternalism disadvantage. They are completely disinterested in the massive amount of legal activism that disabled people have taken from disabled people that have taken place. Our Latour evidence also answers this rant about how we have not answered their theory of power. We have a direct and a complementary theory of power to support all of our stuff about actor network theory, which is basically the assumption that social categories are generated through contingent moments of interaction, which is how the definitions, categories, and relationships of things like disability are established, which does answer their theory of power. They didn't answer the card. Our evidence is supported by sociological research, etc. They have not answered our fucking theory of power. Look to the 2NC also refuses to engage in the idea that reformism debate is good. Our evidence cites examples. The example that the 2NC gives is die-ins as proof of concept of their stuff, but all of those things are examples of demands on the state, solutions that are being proposed in legal arenas. They're like, Reagan, fucking care about AIDS. All of those things were intentional actions that were driven by all of that stuff. They also don't solve any of this. There is no terminal impact to their stuff about the function of debate, because Jesus fucking Christ, we are all friends, and the three of them will probably go fucking play League before we all go to CETA next weekend. For clarification, they might be right that they have links to the app. They've also repeatedly made references to arguments about the process of technical debate, engaging in substantive text, etc. The alt does not solve any of those things, and that they have engaged in, but the block just refuses to, in certain instances. They have already not engaged the F. So voting AF does not solve just as much, because there's no ballot key claim. The extinction debate stuff, extinction does outweigh, it's a moral priority. Future generations make it functionally unlimited. All of their case of extinction presume that we've already run a competing moral theory. It's the only irreversible impact. You have a bias against them because of scope neglect and the availability of heuristic, which means that we should engage in those discussions. Not a claim of temporal free riding. You are not the problem, but extinction still fucking matters and is at least a justification for things happening. The permutation do both solves all of their offense if they do go for any of the alternative functions about care, operations, etc. The daydreaming stuff, there's no explanation for what that does in debate, how that overcomes anything, or writ large. All of our co-option stuff, though, is a net benefit to the permutation because of all of the stuff that I explained above about claiming credit, etc., for the function and decisions that disabled people take in the status quo. The alternative proper does not solve. I don't know. They're like, we script them as unproductive. It's not a question of like productivity, but what the fuck does a negative ballot do? Why is it important? Those are still relevant questions, even if it's like it doesn't produce it, even if it's like production or something. Why do we have to produce something that's good either? No answer.
It's 9:32.
Is everyone back for the 2-hour? Okay, looks like 5 to me. Give a sec for Sydney to sit back down. So it's gonna be the K. Is there anyone that is not ready? Thumbs up, looks like we're good. Okay.
Wait, hold on.
Sorry,
So
okay.
you say the K.
I did say the K, yes.
You just mean like the 2NC overview, like framework.
You're not gonna be happy with what I answer that question with, so I would say flow straight down because maybe the overview is good. I mean, I'm gonna rant for a bit and I'm gonna.
All right, well, give me 1 second.
Okay, I mean, yeah.
So I'm gonna put them in the order that I.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Okay. I'm gonna start in like 5 seconds unless someone verbally interrupts me. The 1AR has like 0 offense drops, so many linked arguments, and overly reliant on posturing about what the fuck the ballot does, as if our refusal to tell them is not the entire fucking point. But just because they seem to be investing a lot of eggs in that ballot, in that basket, I'm going to answer why the ballot is voting negative is important in this debate. First, you need to hold Wichita accountable for their linked arguments, their framework arguments, peripheralize scholarship and performance by letting them leverage things like fiat case outweighs extinction impacts, which will always be sort of able to outscale or outcalculate sort of intimate forms of violence that get reproduced in debates. Second is that you should reward us for the labor of refusal. We had to fucking educate them, and that shit is not easy or enjoyable. Third is that you should disavow the affirmative because we have impact turned the skills that they produce insofar as they get exported to enforce reactionary politics and police legibility of disabled people's politics. Now you should vote negative to refuse Wichita's participation in sacrifice. So in a debate, if I win a single link to their scholarship or rhetorical performance of the affirmative, then you should reject them, even if you believe other parts of the 1AC or their model of debate are desirable, because faith in capitalism's recuperability is how eugenics gets rationalized. I'm going for 2 internal link arguments at the top. First is this exchange argument that is sort of embedded in the 2NC overview that they just do not have an answer to at any point in this debate, which is that their model is equipping debaters with the skills to trade disabled death for abled life, which is why I explained through multiple pieces of re-highlightings in the 2NC that the 1AR just does not say verbatim at all. You should not make me re-explain it in its entirety, but they will basically try to convince you to affirm a world of eugenics by these specific arguments like case outweighs, saying yes, we might kill lots of disabled people, but extinction is so much worse, which is why they will rationalize the construction of mom and pop small farms that still rely on the exploitation of undocumented labor. They have conceded that this is a turns case argument that insofar as the 1AC relies on a necropolitical underbelly to sustain the formal economy, because they require on the debilitation of workers who must harvest but cannot eat or get protected by the cooperatives that the 1AC establishes, which means that you cannot assume the 1AC's desirability or case outweighs argument. They've also dropped a framing argument from the 2NC that answers their util arguments, which is that even if you believe they solve a 100% risk of extinction today, that does not mean everyone gets to live tomorrow, because there is no shared attachment to the good life, especially given their concession of our theory of power. Their only response to stuff about disability is the paternalism diss at the bottom of the 1AR, but we have already internal link turned that card insofar as they are functionally stealing credit from grassroots disabled activists who are literally fucking halting fucking congressional deliberations in policy speeches, staging die-ins when people are trying to host debates that the legal skills that they sort of would try to cultivate would be producing. We would be the ones interrupting them. They would not be the ones interrupting Congress makers, which means that is a fundamentally negative argument. But second sort of internal link argument I'm gonna go for at the top is the liberalism / counterinsurgency argument. They 1AR claim that it is violent to suppress the 1AC scholarship, but it is not violent to affirm the eugenicism of the 1AC scholarship. Is our argument about how liberalism co-opts
adopts forms of the rhetoric of dispossession to naturalize its own violence. They will claim that it is violent that we exclude ALEC from debate, even though the scholarship they are reading is actively dispossessive, and they have conceded that. You should understand this through the 1AR argument on framework that says that our model is bad because it forces them to, quote, have 100% link mitigation. Yes, you should have 100% link mitigation for eugenics. Our argument is that any other standard is what rationalizes that exchange, because you can generate an infinite amount of copium reasons to say, well, sorry, disabled folks, fuck off and just die because I wanted to win a fucking debate round. This is our impact turn to fairness. The framework proper debate, they've not answered our role of the judge, which is the only piece of judge instruction in this debate. You have to refuse to play the game you inherited, because aircraft carrier ideas shoot down critical thought. It means even if you wanted a different form of clash, even if you wanted a plan-based debate, even if you wanted a distinct form of rejoinder, or conclude that their arguments are necessarily true, they have dropped a sequencing claim about how it is necessary to abolish the desire for power and accumulation, because our whole argument is that things like case outweighs fiat and content-based debates let them look past the disabled people in the room with them, pleading with them to divest from eugenics and continue business as usual, because treating debate as a game that neutrally tests content lets them ignore the material stakes of rhetoric, that being right or wrong about the question of whether competitive markets are eugenic might not just lose them a debate, but lots of disabled lives. There are so many pieces of evidence in the 1AC that are committed to hyper-productivity and extraction, and they don't dispute this. They kick the cap good stuff, but then still believe they can win this debate. Their unfairness good stuff straight turns their fairness arguments, because you should hijack competitive incentives to discourage participation in the sacrifice zone. Deplatforming the app solves our Leonard evidence says that speech acts are not neutral mediums, but technologies designed to persuade, corral, and gather political desires. The fiction that debate is only ever good faith content neutral refinement ignores the reactionary investments enabled by their model, insofar as people are rewarded for getting the skills to succeed in the sacrifice zone. None of the 1AR is fucking responsive to any of these winged arguments, and I might make some technical concessions, but you should not be willing to check out on any of those things, because we are just so far ahead on the big picture questions that are relevant for your evaluation of the debate. Now, the permutation is also a non-starter because it does not have an explanation of the 1AR about how the synthesis of our positions would even make sense or cohere itself or solve any of our linked arguments. But you should understand the alternative refusal to participate in the sacrifice zone as the refusal to participate in the sacrifice zone of debate. The only risk of co-option in this debate is them, which is a conceded argument, because they compare our arguments in this round with corporate messaging campaigns and use capitalism as a threat against us. The Anderson card pleads with us to engage in, quote, rational argumentation with them, because they don't want to reckon with the fact that the model of debate they produce is violent. But fuck it, be irrational. Vote for an alt that might not solve the links, because only ever producing solutions that are legible to their model of debate is bad, because it means we can never confront aircraft carrier ideas. So when the 2AR asks you a million questions about alt solvency, remember the alt is key to attend to structures of power, whereas their contingency framing can only ever tend to symptoms of capital and provide solutions palatable to eugenic policymakers, like, let's fix the fucking milk industry and save disabled people that way. Refuse that, refuse them, and vote negative, because everything they have done in this debate is fucking undesirable, and the desire to recuperate any portion of it is our sacrifice and exchange argument.
We're starting. Let me save this in Dropbox. Sure. Time's up whenever y'all are good.
Features folder.
Is there a specific order?
Probably just top, straight down the flow. Sorry, 2NR is messy.
So the 2NR order then?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, hold on.
We'll just say that. All right, all good? All right, sweet. The top of this 2NR is that the paternalism DA outweighs the terms of critique. 2NR mishandles the paternalism DA. It's not a question of disability activism, but GMU has lost themselves in debate. It turns our entire negative strategy. Liz and 2NC cross-examined sanctioned 2NC cross-examined sanctioned target practicing against disabled people who disagreed or that they don't like on questions of ideology. It's not a right or wrong question, but GMU has weaponized identity to dictate who is considered a good disabled person under their interpretation. It is fine to reproduce psychic violence into police debaters and weaponize eugenics against disabled people who they disagree with the thesis of their argument, which turns all of their framework and link arguments because debaters who disagree with their ideology should be punished, which is all their link arguments describing capitalism, punishing people who are unproductive, i.e. disabled debaters who don't agree are ostracized and pushed out of the community, replicates their argument and functions of debate and how it's ableist as a network is a net benefit to our interpretation. We don't need to win any extinction or leap defense. If you think the above is true, that means the entire 2NR strategy is a double turn. There are other examples. Top of the 2NR is another example where they talk about concessions. 2NC goes on there's a whole portion of 2NC talking about debate norms and technical truths being bad for disabled people and causing eugenics in debate because of cohesion and the activity, which is a secondary example. The third example that happens in the 2NR is technical concessions on the framework flow. The technical concessions on the framework flow. The row of the judge about aircraft carrier ideas is exactly what the 2NR turns itself into, is nuking ideas of disabled debaters who present alternatives because they are wrong on an ideological basis, which means that it prescribes that the entirety of the debate shouldn't happen in the first place, and those disabled debaters who have different ideas should not be able to engage in this debate at all, which I cannot illustrate enough, is a complete double turn to the entirety of the negative strategy. They lose this debate on this alone. But if you don't think that it operates as a net benefit to our framework because it avoids those debates, because of planned implementation and discussions of other things, they don't have any offense on what discussing agriculture is bad, which means you should weigh the plan. It outweighs the 2NR framework because it clashed, because it's key to testing ideas and research, which circumvents yes no questions about political ideology that the 2NR turns into. But also it means that we have to answer every single link argument when they are paternalizing what those link arguments look like in the first place, which means that the non-starter moots the entirety of the 1AC and 2AC, which means a fairness does outweigh because disabled debaters can debate on the F2 in these circumstances, which means there's 100% win. There's 100% risk that we are winning, that limiting debate and having debates about the plan is to some degree good. You can still, in this world under interpretation, evaluate the links to the plan, but those aren't very good either because we never drop their theory of power, i.e. all their links to the plan don't make any sense in context of our posturing arguments in the 2AC. The 2NC postures this argument is not a reason it doesn't answer the K. Actor network theory better explains social relations in context of their arguments. Categories and dominations are built upon contingent moments and interactions and confrontations with one another. It is not walled off containership that is impenetrable to social or something like that. It is backed up by sociological
sociological research. Their sacrifice zone is not an answer. We have impact turned everything about a negative ballot with the co-option cards in the 1AR. We did not answer the link arguments that the 2NR actually goes for about the plan. The only example given in the 2NR is about migrant labor argument, which is non-unique, which is a 2AC argument. It is descriptive about how farms work now. The plan is the only thing that would make it possible to have an increased wages for allow farmers to raise their prices, because cable operations are where those people are exploited in the status quo and they are pushed out. Additionally, you should be highly skeptical about the rhetorical move that the 2AR calls you to make. Political activity does not spill about a debate into how they think. A speech in and in itself is a form of investment because it fails to get co-opted by capitalism. Think of Black Lives Matter and campaigns. We should not be doing dirty work of getting to the nitty-gritty details. We should have engagement about the substance of political ideologies. Just saying that we weaponize capitalism against them is not good enough for a link argument, because they have dropped a disadvantage to their methodology that outweighs the terminal impacts of the debate round. The only other link argument they make is about consequences of extinction. They have conceded a piece of evidence that concede that extinction is significantly more likely than we price into our imaginary, i.e. policymakers and other people underwrite that possibility because they see it as too many lives to lose. We have read a piece of evidence that uses sociological research to back up the likelihood, which means that if you do think the AF has a possibility of solving that impacts, it does outweigh and turn the critique, because obviously disabled people die in times of war as well, and they're probably the first to cite it, i.e. it would cause cutting back of medical benefits for them. But there is no explanation in the 2NR why this is any more than a link of omission, that we don't have discussions of migrant labor and how disabled people interact with them, which means it's a non-starter and it's not unique to the AF. No reason or explanation about the alternative in context of any of these link arguments, why it solves them other than its kite ideas. What does kite idea mean in context? I know that the 2NR said I'd make these arguments, but even if they've won a sequencing claim, we are winning even if they've won a sequencing claim, it doesn't answer the question for how the alternative is able to generate uniqueness for any of the link arguments that the 2NR has indicated about the F, i.e. I don't know how the fuck farming cooperatives and making them stronger for small farmers just foregoes the possibility of people with disabilities existing in the first place, or how it continues or extends those violence, which means that this is a non-unique dissat coming out of the 2NR. They have no explanation for what those look like in context. Even if you buy all their arguments about the performance in the debate, we have double turned that. And even if you don't believe if you don't believe the double turn arguments, we are winning that we better access those things to research skills that have been debate, i.e. having discussions about why agriculture and disability are linked or net better, which they have engaged those discussions, but not at a level to prove any causal link argument that they've gone for in the 2NR, or have made a solvency argument to why those things are true, i.e. questioning solvency of the alternative is not some form of violence against disabled debaters. Rather, it is a question if the alternative is able to solve the arguments or generate uniqueness for any of the arguments they're going for in context. Because if you think that alternative is a non-starter, then you should default to our analysis of how this entire debate is functioned. Good debate, y'all.
All right, I'm the renderer of the decision since I was the last one in. All right, let's see, we have the debaters. We're missing Corey and Amber.
Did anyone hit the summon button or anything?
Oh, I can do that.
Never
Okay.
mind. They're here.
All right, congratulations, everyone. This was a great debate. The winner of this debate, the double active finals of the NDT on a 4-1 decision for the negative from George Mason. All right, I got sat. I voted on the double turn. I don't think that the neg is doing enough to distinguish the type of debate the affirmative is doing from the type of debate the negative is doing, especially in the context of dropped 2NR answers to the negative performance links too. I think that some of the articulations of why, and I'll admit that I voted more on the flow than the evidence. I did read the evidence, but in terms of concessions in the 2NR, I think that some of the arguments, people are rewarded for technical skills in debate and punished for not having them. But the AF flagged two things about the negative performance that links. First is like the negative participates in similar techne on the line by line in terms of like dropped arguments equals concessions, but then has that sort of expectation that they can drop arguments and then exploit dropped arguments. And then this paternalism disad, specifically like the good, bad disabled subjects who seek or do not seek reforms. In the context of like this ACT UP example, I think that the affirmative is talking about like, even though it's true that the affirmative doesn't like access movements like this in the sense that like these movements are bottom up, but I think the affirmative earlier on is articulating that these movements are ultimately movements articulated at making demands on the state, like for example, ACT UP making demands on Reagan to change policies, and disabled people engaging in that form of reformism debate to say that like combined with, I thought it was good how the AF sort of rhetorically paired this with the aircraft carriers argument about like shooting down debaters who seek reform strategies versus debaters who seek radical strategies. And I do think the 2AR was a little bit late on the sort of like disabled people can engage in policy debate as well too. But in terms of like disabled people engaging in reformism and the negative having the performance of sort of like shooting down that type of engagement with the state, and that proves that ideology sort of overrides concern for access, because this aircraft carrier metaphor, like shooting down non-radical thoughts amongst disabled subjects that seek demands on the state. And even in the context of looking at some of the like the reasons to vote for refusal, like rewarding the labor of refusal, even looking back on that, I'm thinking like this bites into the like critique of the production of labor as being something valuable. So I think that both teams leave a lot unresolved on the terminal impact level, which makes it hard for me. I think that the turn sort of re-entrenches the neg framework of any risk of the negative framework that they posit of like any risk of eugenics is a reason that I have to refuse the AF. If they win the double turn, which I have as like sort of conceded about the negatives performance, then I have to reject the negatives performance too, because both teams are engaging in a form of like debate techne that has some ableism. And so framework becomes kind of a wash because both teams are doing these kinds of things. And so looking on the case debate, I contemplated this kind of like life is not worth living because of disability, but I just felt like this is where I felt more impact calculus on both sides was needed, but it wasn't developed enough for me to be like, okay, even if framework debate resolves in favor of the AF, that life isn't worth living is a good enough reason to vote, because life isn't worth living because like disabled people are sacrificed, but if they win that their AF solves extinction, which they do because like the AF is just uncontested in this round in terms of what the plan can generate. So it's like I'm preventing the death of all disabled people by solving for extinction, which is like the terminal impact of the eugenics is like disabled people die. So I don't really know why life is not worth living in the context of the affirmative in the world where I accept the affirmatives framework. So that's why I voted affirmative.
Okay. Yeah, I can go. I thought this was honestly a really excellent debate. So congratulations, y'all, for making it this far and doing so well. Wichita, you should especially be proud of yourselves. Like this was a phenomenal debate from you all. I ended up voting on this. Ultimately, the kind of thesis argument that they win is this exchange argument that debate as it is produces subjects that are trained to trade disabled life for the greater good. I think this is exemplified through the utilitarianism debate. I think George Mason is winning that debate creates zones of sacrifice where we're trained to find moments where disabled life can be pushed out. I think the AF on util is very light on the logic of utilitarianism as it would be applied to disability. And what I mean by that is I think you're good on the question of that extinction and nuke war would affect disabled people. But I think the negatives claim is more so how a paradigm of utilitarianism would get applied to other questions outside of extinction. And I think they're winning that would more than likely justify a genocide of disabled folks. I think the line that they say that not everyone gets to live till tomorrow also makes a lot of sense in the context above and kind of frames how I think about the utilitarianism debate. Is that there would be extinction of disabled people in these kind of interim moments while we wait for the ultimate extinction of the AF or whatever. So the target practice paternalism part of the debate, this part of the debate is hard to parse through, I think, because I kind of agree with Sydney that both sides are just kind of throwing their impacts against each other and kind of just like brushing off their opponents without a lot of impact calculus between the two. And I think at the end of the debate, this posturing ends up hurting the AF more than negative. I think first the paternalism argument, as is framed as an internal link to the way the AF goes for the 2AR, that the AF puppets disabled activists, that it just uses their experiences for a ballot. I think this ends up being kind of a linked argument that I end up weighing against the AF that I don't think is really answered, because I think the top of the 2AR is just like, no, this doesn't answer our thing. But I'm like, well, it is still a linked argument that they've made that's kind of indicting your model and the way you've approached the debate. So I can end up kind of thinking of it as a linked argument, but ultimately I end up thinking, how do I weigh targeting practice, the kind of way the AF is going about it or the negative is going about it versus the other impacts mentioned above. I think the neg creates the distinction in cross-ex about disabled folks can still commit ableist violence. And I think that ultimately frames how I decide this. And I think the AF just kind of scoffs that up. And you're like, nah, I don't think that's how that works. But I'm not really sure why pushing out ableist logic is still a logic of target practice and turns the alternative as described in this debate. And instead, I think they just a check on these types of things and to check on ableist violence means that they do have to win a risk of a link. I do think that we don't just like debate is ableist, so we push you out. It's like how have you kind of come to those things and how we've defended debate. And so I think they've won at least a risk the way the AF's model kind of purports debate that it would create these kind of logics. A couple of other things is the migrant link debate. I think ultimately there's just a mismatch at least on my flow between 1AR and 2AR in this part of the debate. I have in the 1AR just you should read our evidence. That's not what the evidence is talking about. And then the 2AR is about we're going to end up paying them and it's non-unique. Farmers already get illegal workers. At the truth level, the loot card, I go back and read it, is about just domestic labor shortages happening due to a lack of pay and like other things. And I think if the AF just rereads that, it's like, no, this isn't about migrant work. It's literally just like, we don't have domestic work because people don't get paid. It's like that seems to me like an easy enough pushback, but you don't do that work. So I at least grant them some risk of this migrant link, the way it's kind of explained. And so the last two things is the theory of power debate and the alternative debate. I'm not really sure why the AF's theory of power matters at the end of the debate in the context of the link question. I think this goes to the question of getting to a permutation debate slash how the AF would resolve these kind of links questions using network theory. I just think you're kind of like, well, network theory can do these things, not really an application or permutation work that I think actually explains how the AF would do those things. And I think at the end of the debate, the alt stuff, I think alt solvency is through rejecting of the things mentioned above. So I think a lot of the 2AR moves are just kind of posturing that's just kind of like not really grappling with the articulation of refusal. And so that's the rambling part of my decision. I'll let the other judges go. And then if you all have any questions or anything, we can do that part.
Yeah, I just want to say that this was a really excellent debate. Congratulations, Wichita. Are you all seniors?
No, not technically.
Yes, but we're doing a fifth year.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I just want to say bravo, because I think that the pivots that you tried to make were really, really fucking excellent. Even though at the end, I think that they're not sufficient, and I'll say why. But I just want to say that this was some really excellent debating. So yeah, like I said, I really like the moves that are being made. At the end, I don't think that it's enough. I think that the negative is winning, that the affirmative's politics, as indicated by multiple lines from the AF, though I do agree with what Derek said about, you know, that they're potentially having been more here about some misreadings of some things. But I think overall that, you know, the negative is doing a good job of saying that there are these things in the AF that, you know, indicate that the AF thinks these things to be good ideas, like, for example, the mirroring of the corporate form, the entrepreneurial aids in the supply chain, et cetera, even though those aren't specifically, you know, stated explicitly in the 2NR, they are, I think, referenced insofar as the 2NR says that the AF's rhetoric is invested in capitalism's recuperability, which trades disabled death for abled life, and that it's fundamentally necropolitical and eugenicist, and that furthermore, this does in fact require 100% link mitigation, and that this is a problem of rhetorical exchange and the disavowal of the materiality of rhetoric. And so I think that it's happening, you know, these links are happening simultaneously insofar as they're indicting a form of debate that kind of overcoats and, you know, makes us disavow the importance of these kind of things, the weightiness of these kind of things, and also our commitments of the entire kind of political imaginary of the AF. You know, that the links, you know, this also links to the form of debate, that it mirrors those investments, as I just said, and they call this a sacrifice zone of scholarship. And so that this produces a systemic kind of disability, or it even relies on a kind of systemic disability to train us to, and to sort of rhetorically overpower others who lack this kind of training. And so what all of that means is that I should prioritize deplatforming and refusal, and that this does something in the here and the now, because performance links are happening in real time. So I think about the paternalism DA and the double turn in the 2AR, but I don't think that it quite gets to this level. I think that there's some broader questions here. And I think ultimately that the late breaking nature of this kind of argument means that there's somewhat of a mischaracterization of what the negatives arguments are, that I think that they just have much more fleshed out. And so I think that, you know, what appears to be characterized by the affirmative as an issue of like exclusion, like how you're characterizing that they also are targeting. And I go back and I think about earlier in the debate when, you know, there's that kind of exchange about things like the difference between identity politics and thinking systemically, et cetera. And I don't think that that level of the debate is exactly where you all get to on the affirmative. And so I think it's not really about exchange, but or about exclusion, but it's about exchange and this necropolitical form of exchange and disavow. I do think that there is something really to this. And I think that this line of, you know, argument and the just general strategy just needs to be developed more and earlier. And I think one thing that I would have really have liked to have seen is it tied to a much more robust defense of your model of debate writ large. But as it is, I think that the negative does a sufficient job making some distinctions in the 2NR and, you know, elsewhere about, for example, the lawyer Congress investments of the AF and the manner in which resistance movements would be operating through the alternative, which is in the 2NR. there are other moments, some which Derek also referenced, that I kind of think about, like, this argument about the migrant thing, but I think, again, it doesn't quite get to the issue. Like you're saying, these are links of admission, but these are also about investments that your evidence has. And so I have like open questions like, do you get to kick those things? I think you'd have to win that you do, and what that means for a particular model of debate and why that model of debate is good. And even though I think it's really wise that you don't go for like, we outweigh or fiat good, but there still has to be something about why those rhetorical implications do or don't still matter, and how you're going to overcome that kind of level of the argument. So ultimately, I think that it would have been good to have a bigger defense of why your model of debate is good, why the portable skills that it produces is good, something like not everybody becomes a lawyer, kind of what you were doing with the activist stuff about ACT UP more, pragmatic solutions, solve dogmatism, all of that kind of stuff, and then apply that really much more specifically to the indicting of deplatforming. But overall, I thought that this was a really, really phenomenal debate. Congratulations, just amazing work.
I can go if that's cool, Shae. All right, but yeah, great debate. Echo everything that the other two judges have said in terms of the vigor of this debate and being honored to judge it. I think for me, it really comes down, or the place that I start is sort of the competing theories of power, because I think that's really important for parsing out which team's offense is more important than the other, how I think about, this framing contention and sort of the double turn that you all go for. I think that there's like kind of a fundamental problem with just neither of the theories of power really interacting with each other in a substantive way throughout the debate. So they have sort of presenced the negative is presence this idea of how debate operates as sort of a zone of sacrifice that continuously churns people who are rendered as disabled to sort of feed neoliberal capitalistic desires, et cetera. You all have re-raised that sort of there are contingencies, or that contingency is sort of the nature of social relations, and that it is incorrect to sort of staticize certain modalities of violence or forms of politics, et cetera. And that's a reason why the affirmative is like generative good can do things, and we should value sort of the action of that. The issue that I have is that I don't think that the idea of sort of contingency is ever apply to their argument about how debate operates. I think that you have made sort of a larger macro political claim that is a little bit, it's kind of too big. And I think I need you to make it small, because they have particularized the debate to the action that the affirmative sort of justifies, but also the iterative process of engagement within your model or within the debate proper is one that is towards a zone of sacrifice. So even if they lose sort of the content level of the debate, there's just like a uniqueness claim about how debate operates and whether or not the educational model or paradigm that you participate in is beneficial. I'm not really sure what to do with sort of the contingencies, almost kind of like a quasi we get our affirmative because it's possible to do stuff in that world. So that kind of colors or characterizes the rest of the debate for me. I think that there's fundamentally a conceded piece of offense from the sort of the theory of power argument that then dictates the direction of impacts. I think if they're correct on their claim, then even if you get your extinction arguments, which I do think you get them, because I'm not really sure that they're making sort of defensive pushes against their extinction argument, they have said that comes at the expense of people who are rendered disabled, so essentially they don't live to see the next day. I think that's an important distinction, because it does characterize the sequencing claim of how they're discussing the alternative refusal, or just their model of refusal, which kind of reshapes the extinction debate to say that they do prevent some model of extinction, but you don't prevent the extinction that they solve for, and the solvency of your extinction is always a delayed extinction for someone else. So it's kind of like it neutralizes and becomes a negative zone where just like a neutral zone where I don't think that there's a unique affirmative impact in that world, because it seems like extinction happens, regardless of the affirmative sort of venture or pivot. So I think that supercharges some of the offense that they're going for about sort of these zones of sacrifice and configurations of disability and how people are sort of churned and cranked. I think that goes into the double turn argument, because I read their sort of framing as a question of politics, where if you all have sort of made the argument about individuals who do certain actions who are disabled, I think that they've already sort of preempted that argument when they're like, disabled people can do or engage in politics that are not beneficial for disabled people. And it is kind of like it creates sort of a monolith of disability in a weird way that we probably shouldn't affirm. I think that you can definitely do some work here to cut into sort of this politics direction, but I think I don't think that work necessarily happens. And so I am recalling sort of the negative argument or the explanation there that it is a political question. I think the concession of the theory of power makes it so that just becomes a truth claim, sort of in my mind, that I don't really know what the resolution is. So I certainly agree that you have this turn, and I am questioning, what are the negative sort of ventures in, the techne of debate, and how do they navigate sort of the zone of sacrifice themselves, given some of the links that they're going for. But I ultimately resolve that it doesn't fundamentally matter, because they have set sort of the ballot as just a question of refusal. And I think even if there are some of these residual links to some of the other arguments that they have made, a la the value debate, or whose politics should be extended, whatever, even if there's like some residual links, I still don't know if that results in saying yes to the affirmative. And I think that's sort of the ballot configuration that they set for me, that isn't really challenged independent of the affirmative sort of you get to the AF, which I think is implicated by the theory of power. I could talk about other stuff, but I thought that was like most important to me for figuring out the debate. And so that's kind of how I landed.
Okay, so I also voted negative on the kind of top level thesis argument about the eugenics as produced through the utilitarianism debate, the migrant workers debate, as well as the capitalist recuperation debate, which I think have been very well explained by previous judges. And this justifies a type of genocidal relationship towards disability in favor of fantastic fictions that we sort of have to distance ourselves from. And importantly, I think that the negative has done a very, very good job of explaining why this produces a mode of intimate violence in debate, especially in the form of things like psychological violence for people with disability. And I think it's that kind of proximity that the affirmative really fails to deal with in this debate, because a lot of the responses end up just exemplifying further impact turns in terms of sort of technical outflanking, or even kind of the desire to gaslight people out of their embodied experiential knowledge. So it creates a real easy avenue and sort of focusing lens for me in terms of how I understand what types of politics my ballot can intervene into and what type of commitments each team is making. As a result, I think that there's a very easy ethics disad that I can kind of understand that the negative is overwhelmingly winning. And so it requires a very similarly strong position for me to come from the affirmative in order to get my ballot to swing the other way. The first place I kind of look for this on the flow is this question of the double turn, about kind of the techne of debate and the norms of debate. And I think for me, one of the big problems was that when the negative is initially making a lot of these arguments, I understood it as attempting to weaponize those tools as a way of denying people's embodied experiential knowledge. It's not just that following the line by line or like pointing out drops or reading cards is intrinsically ableist, but it's how we use those things, how we communicate those ideas in a debate. And so I don't think that the double turn really meets the level of a strong link that I would need, because it really has a very reductive interpretation of what the negative's original argument is. The second is this paternalism disad about whether or not they dictate the terms of communication and engagement for all disabled people. And I agree with Corey's sort of example that early on in Cross-X, it's like, well, yes, disabled people can do eugenic things, and we ought to say no to that, right? We have an ethical responsibility to intervene in those moments as much as an abled person committing those forms of violence. And So I'm not overwhelmingly convinced that the AF is winning a strong offensive argument against the negative's position, whether it's at the level of the thesis or in terms of the performance of the negative. As a result, I think that the affirmative has to have an overwhelming justification for weighing the plan, or maybe your theory of power sort of disproving the function of intimate violence. But I think neither of those things arise at a level of truth for me. I already kind of mentioned why I think that the negative is winning these sort of like outflanking embodied knowledge impact turns to your framework argument, that you sort of just teach us to trick disabled people, to kind of exploit them in order to justify these grandiose ideas that we really have no kind of control or authority over, which justifies that top level eugenics impact. As for the theory of power stuff, I don't think even if you had an overwhelmingly convincing justification for why actor network theory is like the dominant or truest model would be sufficient for me to vote affirmative, because the terminal impact of the criticism is about quotidian acts of violence in the space that we occupy. So even if your actor network theory is true, that it's all produced through contingent experiences, this debate is a contingent experience of eugenic violence, right? This is what I'm exposed to. It seems like the negative could have done a little bit more here in terms of kind of exploiting that fact, because it seems like the AF's theory of power is actually a reason why I should vote negative. And so maybe clearing that up in the 2NR might have made it a little bit easier in some cases, especially given some of the offense that the affirmative is going for. But in the end, I just can't construct a ballot for the affirmative that does not reproduce a eugenic logic that I have to refuse, right? Who survives today is not the same thing as who dies tomorrow. And the negative is making very clear that we all have a responsibility to intervene into that. They have chosen refusal. I choose that refusal as well.
And I just want to say real quick that, like, I respect and all the other judges obviously here and your decisions. Like, I'm not disagreeing with your decisions, but in the context of hearing the other judges' decisions, I do feel like the affirmative, like, maybe over pushes is a little bit repetitive on the alt doesn't resolve any of these issues. But I do think in the context of the alt not resolving these issues, it does make me think that the negative, like the other judges, I felt uncomfortable voting on ethics because the word ethics wasn't in the 2NR. And in order for ethics to be a framing in the context of an alternative, like not resolving and the negative going for sort of refusal is our ethics, but then the refusal doesn't have a way of like changing the direction of a lot of the link arguments that they're talking about, then the negative in my opinion, could definitely have won this debate, but the 2NR needed to do more reframing to say, like, because in my perception, this debate was more about debate. And now listening to the other judges, it's like, it wasn't, it was about refusing the politics of the AF as well, based on the ethics of eugenics that they uphold by trying to, like sacrifice zones of sacrifice in exchange for like saving what types of bodies, right? But I think the negative needed more work in the 2NR for why ethics in the context of a not unique impact, why ethics is a vote, like is a unique framework for voting. Does that make sense?
I don't want to spend too much time because I assume everyone wants to go to awards. I have no idea when those are actually going to start, but I think part of the problem coming to the 1AR was like grasping for offense to bring into this framework debate. Do you think there were like parts of the 2AC or new things that could have become more offensive arguments or part of the framework debate? Because I do think that we end up kind of like running for defense.
I don't know why you didn't go for cap good in the 1AR. I thought that would have really helped with like building up offense of why the ethics of the F is not a zone of sacrifice. And especially in a world where they pivot to go for more like substantive links instead of just like links about debate. I think the cap good stuff, more of the framework about how policy debate, like earlier on, before the 2AR, explanations about how your model is accessible to disabled people, not just in the context of disabled people making demands on the state, but in the context of the efficacy of those demands and the efficacy of those types of investments and the types of politics that your advocacy skills train for, how those are, one, accessible to disabled people, how there's different ways to engage in those spheres, and just building up, basically just isolating that you need to build up more offense on your framework. And then if you win that capitalism is good, which they kind of go to and like, we're not going to engage on the line by line of why capitalism is good. But then when you don't go for capitalism is good, then what happened in this debate is the capitalism debate ends up getting tied into the reasons why, that it necessitates necropolitics, which indicts the AF. So a little bit more focus, like a little bit less focus on what the alt doesn't do. You can just say that one time that the alt doesn't resolve these things, and then focus more on building up the offense of like what the AF model does.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you have these arguments like this whole, corporations right now are infecting and overdetermining the direction of discussions, and all that kind of stuff. I think you could have like really made that into a whole kind of thing, and to give you some uniqueness for why, there are particular approaches to debate that can be valuable, that the AF is invested in to really defend those things. And I think, to tie that to, we're not the worst instances of things. Our AF is about regulated capitalism, and to really just defend that, like we are the middle of the road here, not runaway capitalism, corporatism, et cetera, and yeah, have that defense in order to kind of, respond to some of this. There's just this is completely bankrupt. There's just nothing valuable about these kinds of discussions. And to say, actually, right now, the fact that corporations are heavily invested in us not having these kinds of discussions should indicate that there could be something really valuable about having them. And that's why we need to be having these kinds of discussions here, if that makes sense.
That doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah, so like just more of those and those 2AC cards that are just like antitrust debates are good. Couple that with the like cards that are the co-op stuff. Yeah. Okay.
Especially just being able to tie that to how your framework can allow a mode of embodied knowledge, right? So much of the reason that at least I end up voting negative is that really only the negative has an explanation for the debate itself, right? You have like a framework that then like appeals to something else and like the skills that we get for something else. But it doesn't really explain how it would address forms of intimate violence, how it would help galvanize embodied knowledge, right? What does clash and fairness do for the experiences that we've had, or for the experiences of disabled people? So I think being able to tie the kind of impacts you're going for the kind of top level frame that the negative is winning is kind of a necessary maneuver for me to think that the app is getting back into the debate.
That's fair.
I'm gonna be honest, my brain's fried from this weekend, so I don't have any questions right now. I might email y'all if I do. Nothing's coming to mind right now, so.
Thanks, y'all. Good luck, George Mason.
Excellent
Good
debate.
luck.
Excellent
Good luck,
tournament.
Awesome debate.
Yeah, thank y'all, Wichita, and thank y'all everyone for judging feedback. All right, see y'all at awards in a few.
Yeah, bye.